Anybody tell me on the zone map what zone 4 is? What's zone 4?
Not quite wild.
Not quite wild.
Yeah.
And what do you usually do in the zone map in zone 4? Foraging, timbering, things like that, right? That's the typical zone map.
How about zone 5? What's zone 5?
Untouched wilderness.
Untouched wilderness, yeah. What we're gonna go through this afternoon is a series of what I like to tell my students is like the lab coat for zone 4, right? So if you're a scientist, if you're a chemist, you go into the lab, there's a uniform you put on, right? The lab coat. So we're gonna teach you now a series of observation skills that are basically like the lab coat for zone 4 or zone 5.
So wide angle vision, some people call it owl eyes. So the first thing you do is focus straight in front of you and then look and then start thinking about your peripheral vision. Now put your 2 fingers up in front of your face and then slowly move those fingers until you cannot see them anymore. And then bring them back until they're in focus until you can see them wiggle. Okay, now you can drop your hands, but keep that focus. You should be able to see all this.
Most modern people spend most of our time with our mind focused on what we call tunnel vision, right? We're looking very specifically at details of certain things.
And we're gonna pair it with something else right now that we call fox walk. Most people, you walk like this, you don't really think about where you're walking, you walk on there, but that's really not the best way to do, especially if I'm walking through a forest or something. I wanna be able to not put all my weight first. I don't wanna put my heel first. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm gonna crack anything in front of it, make a lot of noise, scare anything around. You're gonna be in wide angle vision when you do this. You're gonna step with your ball of your feet and then circle in. Do you guys see that?
This is an exaggeration, but it's sort of like your foot is coming down sideways and the outside of your pinky toe hits first.
So the thing is like this, your face is up. You shouldn't have to look at the ground. Your peripheral vision should be able to see the ground. So if I see something, if I feel something that I don't want to step on, I'm not committed yet. Why all this is important is for your observation technique. Now the third thing that we're going to teach you guys that encompasses sort of the rest of what we're doing is deer ears. So everybody turn around and look over there. And then we're going to be completely quiet and we're going to see what we can hear. Take your hand and you cup it like this between each one. Now focus in on that sound that you were just listening to. So all this is really important because when we're dealing with zone 4, we walk in as hikers or we walk in as observers, but if every time you walk into the forest and all the deer and all the animals run away from you, you're not learning a lot from that system. You're not learning the baseline of that system. The whole point of all these exercises is to be able to see baseline of zone 4. Does that make sense? If we're going to go into the woods and design this, it's a little different than the design process that permaculture uses because, like I said, we have to go from being outside observers to part of the ecosystem in there. So the first thing that you do is you're a passive observer. You don't do anything. You observe. You learn what's there, what lives there, their patterns, animal and plant behavior, fungi, things like that.
In the inner zones, like on your farm or at your home in the city or wherever you live, that's your ecosystem. It's the human ecosystem. So you have a lot more say over the design. When you start going out into zone 4 and 5, the wild, it now has to become a much more cooperative design, right? Because that land is not just for people.
So the next stage is focused observation and simple interaction. Now you want to focus on specific. Okay, what type of maple? What type of birch? What type of animal behavior am I looking at? How often? How many? How much population, right? And then you start to do simple interactions.
So we go from passive observation to detailed or focused observation to simple interactions. We don't do anything to the landscape until we have observed it for long enough that we start to have a sound understanding of what's going on. Could be things as simple as hiking on existing trails or foraging some really abundant, really easily identifiable things. And the reason why is because that basic interaction actually deepens your observation practice. So we go from passive observation to focused observation to simple or basic interactions.
And then you go to advanced interactions, right? So you're still doing your observation, doing things like harvesting flowers, leaves, small scale hunting, trapping, things like that. Things that are not gonna be a large modification of the landscape. So, but it deepens your awareness and it deepens your understanding of the system itself, because you're becoming part of the system.
Interactions whose permanence is basically nothing, like something that you can do and that could be gone in a day, to a scale of permanence where interactions that, you might pick something and it's not going to be there till next season, but it's not like a huge impact on the environment. But then we actually move to environmental modifications.
Simple modification.
And this is where we start really incorporating our permaculture design skills and techniques, and we kind of pick them up from our inner zones, our human environment, and we actually start putting them out there.
Simple modifications are maybe taking down small trees, digging roots up. So these things will modify the environment, but not on a scale that's so large that we can't come back from it. Does that make sense? Cutting down small trees, not large trees. You're beginning to modify the environment, but not to the scale that we do out here.
If you buy a new farm, if you buy a farm that's been poorly managed, or you buy an urban lot, that's filled with urbanite and the soil's contaminated, it's a damaged ecosystem, has to be revitalized. That doesn't necessarily look to you like a damaged ecosystem, but the more you study ecology, the history of our wild landscapes, this is a severely damaged ecosystem. And so we actually do get to the point in this process where we are taking on large-scale environmental modifications, the purpose of which is to actually rejuvenate the landscape. This is never going to be the same ecosystem that it once was. But the thing is that all of these trees and all of these animals and all of this fungus co-evolved for millions and millions of years with those megafauna. And the fact that those megafauna have been gone for like 5 to 10 million years, 1,000 years, 5 to 10,000 years, that's the blink of an eye in evolutionary time, which means all of these species that we see, they still have all of the adaptations that they developed to coexist with the megafauna. But the megafauna aren't here anymore.
What we're saying is the ecosystem needs specific nutrient dispersal, seed dispersal, nutrient cycling. That, like I said, you look at that forest and you go, wow, look how healthy that forest is. That's in a stable state, but that is not in the natural stable state. Does that make sense? That was deforested God knows how many times, right? So there are all these, what they call ghosts of megafauna in the ecosystem. Honey locusts have thorns that are this large, right? All that stuff. Avocado, you ever wonder why the avocado seed is this big? What can eat an avocado seed? Nothing, right? So only humans at this point. So what we're doing is seeing what the ecosystem needs.
Here's 2 examples of maybe like woodland management techniques that would be mimicking megafauna. If you're going to take down an overstory in the forest in the way that we consider sustainable, right? We'd go out there with like a herd of workhorses, and cut it down by hand or cut it down with a chainsaw and bring it down with lynches and make sure it doesn't crush other trees. That's not what a mammoth would do, right? If you're gonna knock over a giant tree, knock it over and let it crush whatever it's gonna crush. And what happens in that space is what would naturally happen there. Another example, which to me is completely counterintuitive, but within this sphere of thinking like a megafauna, when we're looking at a farm field, we want to do fertilizing, nutrient dispersal. We try to spread the manure of the animals as evenly over the field as possible, right? But again, if a herd of mastodon walk through, there's going to be a big giant pile of poop in a very, very small area. So instead of going out into the forest, right, and making a nice carpet of wood chips across the floor of the forest, go out there with a pile of wood chips and just dump it in one place. Watch what happens to it over 5 or 10 years. It's amazing. There are plenty of other mechanisms that the forest has to disperse those nutrients out. But those mechanisms only work if the nutrients are concentrated in the beginning.
We're not trying to say we can become megafauna. We're saying we are, but we're not managing it in the same way that would be as useful for wild spaces than it can be.
All right, so the last thing that we're going to do today is orient you to this observation technique that we use as the foundational observation technique in our PDCs and a lot of our workshops. It's called the sit spot.
So a sit spot is it's really a spot that you go and sit, right? But it's your zone 5. That spot is the place that you never touch. You're just an observer there. But the point is to get to that sit spot as much as possible, hopefully every day. And what that does, that allows you, the people, the animals to orient themselves to you and understand. So the more you go, the faster they'll go to their baseline. The faster the deer will come and still browse. The faster the squirrel will come out of its tree. At first it'll take 30 minutes and there'll be no bird sounds, there'll be nothing. And then it'll take 20 minutes and then it'll take 5 minutes. And then you can walk and sit in your sit spot by the end and you can just walk in and the birds will be singing right above your head. I have my sit spot tattooed on me. I went there every day for 8 years. I learned everything from that one spot. I learned it from that spot. Every time a new plant would come up, I would look it up. Every time a squirrel did something, I would say, okay, now, and I journaled about that. So you don't have to live out in the woods to do this. It's, in a lot of ways, it's better to sort of be in a disturbed area.
You can do this anywhere. You start to see this repetition and you start to see these patterns emerge. There's a wavering at your sit spot where for a while you will be like obsessed with some details that you see. And out of that, a huge pattern that you never noticed will emerge. And then the opposite will happen where you'll be like, look at this huge pattern I never saw before. And then you'll start to see all of the tiny details and frequencies of that pattern.